Oh, Nelly! We have an interesting week this week for the quarterback position. There will be tough decisions to be made based on previous performances this season for players, matchups that players have, expectations. It's kind of a wacky week. I have about over a third of the quarterbacks in my second tier. I actually technically have that split up into a 2A and a 2B, but we will get there. First of all, at the end of the video, I will go over, I have some projections that I will show you throughout the video, but then I'll go over kind of how to use my floors and ceilings. That's a tool that I really like that's finally set up. I will also go over my DFS buys at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. So before we get into things, how did I do last week with my love 'em, my fade 'em, and my DFS buys? Well, I said that Kirk Cousins was a great small tournament play. He finished 4th on the week out of all quarterbacks, so I think that probably worked out just dandy. And for large tournaments, I said Justin Fields because I figured that nobody would be stupid enough to spend more on him than what Kirk Cousins was costing. And, I was probably right, but so were they. That one would not have worked out. But that's a large tournament play thing. You know, we're trying to get an edge on people, so it was the risk-reward thing. We knew that it was possible that he would suck. Then for the bargain bin, I gave you a couple of names. CJ Stroud, who finished 10th on the week, so that worked out really well. And then Baker Mayfield finished 25th on the week. Didn't quite work out. Maybe if Mike Evans had hauled one or two of his targets in, things would have looked a little bit better there. But those were the results. As far as my love 'em, I loved Kirk Cousins. Obviously, that worked out well. That was an easy love 'em. And for my fade 'em, I faded Deshaun Watson, just really didn't like how he had played. He ended up 9th on the week, so 2 out of 3 weeks he's come through for you in fantasy. He's one of those players I don't think you want to watch him play. Just look at the end of the day at what he gave you for fantasy points. It's looking like he's going to be one of those guys. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge Week 4 quarterback rankings, and I pulled a little oopsie doop on you there. We're not going to quite get to the rankings yet. First of all, I've promised that there will be projections, and here we go. I have my quarterback projections up, but I did realize actually last week that I might be running into a bit of an issue, and I'm not going to talk about it because then I could talk about it forever, but the short of it is I'm going to have to basically, I thought about it a lot this morning, tinkered around, tried just going about how I've done my rankings for the last couple of years, and it really doesn't work anymore, unfortunately. For, once again, not going to go into it. Basically, it's not my fault is all I'm saying. I didn't lose my projections or anything like that. Put a lot of effort into them, and I'm going to have to rebuild them, but there were things that I didn't like about them previously that I'll be able to fix up now, and I'm going to make them a little bit more simple anyways, and just quicker, so that way I have more time to look at other stuff than sitting there and entering in thousands and thousands of data points. Going to make that process a whole lot easier, but that's probably going to prevent me from getting, at least for the videos, I'm not going to be able to do these projections that I did for the quarterbacks. For the other positions, I'm just going to have to bang those out, and it's going to be a long week for me. So what you are seeing up here is the expected range, not just a single projection, because there's such a low chance that that projection actually ends up meaning anything at the end of the week. Here is a range where we can expect these players to score within. And when I made these rankings, I kept fine-tuning them for the quarterback a lot. These are my kind of pride and joy, so I will be tinkering with these the least. But at the end of the day, tracked them. 50% of the time, players are expected to score within this expected range, roughly 50% of the time. And about 2/3 of the time, players will end up within 1 touchdown or 4 fantasy points, given that I'm basing this off of 4 passing point per passing touchdown leagues, but within this expected range, 2/3 of the time, with that little margin of error there. As far as my ceilings and my floors, which are right here, 5 to 10% of the time, players will go above the ceilings. About 5% of the time, players will go below these floors. So any given week, about 2 to 3 players should go above these ceilings, and about 1 to 2 of them should be going below their floors. But otherwise, most of the time, players are going to be falling definitely between this range, about 9 out of 10 times. Once again, we'll get back to the floor and ceiling tool because I like that at the end of the video. Just want to look at the results this week, and as a reminder, there's a reason I waited 3 weeks before even doing this, but with every game that we get throughout the season, the better these projections get, because right now there are some outliers just based on, you know, what the matchups have been so far, or just players having really good days, really bad days, etc. that can skew things. But so far this week, given the matchup, given how he's performed, looks like Russell Wilson has your lowest or highest low expectation end of the spectrum here, your safest play. He's not going to give you the highest ceiling here against Chicago. Doesn't quite have that in his profile. Cat's puking. All right, so you can find these all up on the website at www.theFFforge.com. There should be a link down in the description. Hopefully I remember to get to doing that. As you can see here, Justin Herbert has a little bit higher of an expected range here than several of the guys around him, and is just right behind just Russell Wilson here as far as this expected range for the low end too. So really, really good play. You can also see over here, this is my player temperature thermostat for the matchup. Red equals hot, blue equals cold, so red is good in this situation. And so Josh Allen, it appears, and or Matt Stafford, I'd say Josh Allen's looks a little bit more darker red there, are in really good situations to, there's two ways you can look at this. You can say to hit their ceilings or go above their ceilings, whatever, have a huge day, or also within these expected ranges to, the situation's primed for them to at least be on the upper end of this expected range, or just go a little bit above it, something like that. The one big thing down here, Joe Burrow, as far as his expected range, you know how his performance has been so far this season. Even the matchup couldn't quite really save him this week, but it is a lukewarm, good-ish matchup for Joe Burrow to maybe have a better week and come back to form this week. But you'll see in my rankings, I am holding everything against him this season so far a little bit. I guess I'm going to have a little bit of a gap here between myself and this. Could have made myself a little bit bigger, but we're just going to get right on into the rankings here for the quarterback position. My first tier, the must-starts, top 8 quarterbacks are going to be Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson in at QB6. Assuming that he plays, he may not, but expecting him to come back, Lamar Jackson and Kirk Cousins. Just a little bit of a note about Tua Tagovailoa going up against Buffalo. Buffalo has done really well against quarterbacks so far this season, only allowing 7.8 fantasy points to quarterbacks on average per week. That said, if you hear that get brought up by anybody, don't be too concerned if they don't bring up the fact that they have matched up against Zach Wilson being thrown into a game. On top of that, Jimmy Garoppolo and Sam Howell. There's a chance by the end of the season we could say, oh, good job by this defense of holding Sam Howell down or Jimmy G. But for the most part, looking at it right now, not too surprising that they've done really well against those quarterbacks. So with Tua, we're not going to be too afraid of that in what Vegas has and what we should expect to be the highest scoring matchup of the week. And that's going to bring us into my 2A tier here, starting at quarterback 9, have Brock Purdy going up against Arizona. And over here on the far right, you can see the difference between myself and the current ECRs as of early afternoon on Tuesday. If it's a positive number, that means I was above the ECR. Negative numbers means that I'm a little bit lower than the ECR, the expert consensus rating from Fantasy Pros, my cat. So I have Brock Purdy in at quarterback 9. Arizona has been in games and forced the opposing offenses to continue to throw. That may not be the case against the 49ers defense, but I'll still happily roll out Purdy this week unless I'm looking for a ceiling, because there is a chance that they'll just run all over Arizona and Brock Purdy doesn't end up getting any passing touchdowns, like a 190-yard game and no touchdowns. I think is within the realm of possibilities. And then at quarterback 10, we have my Fatum of the week. Going back to the well here on Deshaun Watson going up against Baltimore. Baltimore is currently allowing 13.4 fantasy points on average to quarterbacks. And I'm expecting this to be one of those ugly AFC North matchups where neither side really gets too much going on offense. On the bright side, They face CJ Stroud in his first game ever, 2023, and by they I mean the Baltimore's defense. So CJ Stroud in his first game ever, 2023, Joe Burrow specifically, and Gardner Minshew. I have Deshaun Watson ranked this high for a reason. In terms of his fantasy point production, he has earned it. And coming into the season, I felt that Baltimore's secondary was susceptible, and you heard who they've gone against so far this season, and they've only gotten more banged up as far as I'm aware so far in the season, so there's reasons to be optimistic about Deshaun Watson this week. Then Jordan Love in at quarterback 11 is my love. I love this week going up against Detroit. Why this makes me nervous is the fact that it is a Thursday night game. It's Love's first Thursday night game, but I am looking for him to ride the high of Sunday's game against a banged up and already not great secondary behind his O-line, who can hopefully help to keep the strength of that defense away from him, make him feel comfortable. I would feel better about this if Atlanta had done what it's supposed to do and worn down this defensive line, but they didn't quite do that. At quarterback 12, I have Russell Wilson, and he's playing versus Chicago, and he's had a solid fantasy start. The quarterback 9 on the season so far via average fantasy points per week scored. I just don't think that he's going to have a bad week against Chicago. At quarterback 13, on the other side of the field, they have Justin Fields. He's playing against Denver, who just allowed 70 points last week. I don't know. I'm going to give him one last chance in this matchup, and I'm going to take a shot on what could be potentially his first big game of the season. It's okay if you don't want to do that. Totally understandable. Quarterback 14, I have Joe Burrow, and you're darn right that I am concerned. But Tennessee's secondary is not great. That said, they haven't exactly been an astonishing matchup for quarterbacks. They've allowed, on average, 19.1 fantasy points to quarterbacks per week, so not terrible there. It just barely makes them a top 10 matchup for quarterbacks, but that is closer to being a top 15 matchup than being a top 9 matchup. So he's closer, that 19.1 fantasy points allowed is closer to the defense that's allowed the 15th most fantasy points than it is to the defense that's allowed the 9th most fantasy points. Moving on to Tier 2B. And the only reason that I have a splitting of tiers right here between Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence is because of where I have Joe Burrow ranked. I had to look at it and say, well, okay, after Joe Burrow, I'm definitely not starting these guys over him. So in the event that Joe Burrow does get moved up to my quarterback 9, because within these tiers you can shake them up and play whoever you want, and I'm not going to argue against it. If you wanted to play Joe Burrow over to Brock Purdy and I keep this ranking, I'm still not going to argue against it. I might myself move him all the way up there by the end of the week. And in that event, I would just get rid of this tier personally and consider all of these 11 guys to be in the same tier, and you could just start anybody over anybody because it's a funky week. So as far as Trevor Lawrence goes, I need to see something from him. I think that they're going to get this thing fixed, but I am currently concerned. This offense should have absolutely been able to feast up against that Houston defense last week, which was banged up. As far as Jared Goff goes, going up against Green Bay, I'm just comfortable starting him. There's, I have no concerns about starting him, and I think I'll get a solid week out of it. Then for Geno Smith, I am comfortable starting him as well, but teams have not been beating the Giants by putting up gigantic quarterback numbers. That said, something about this matchup feels like it could be quite back and forth, and maybe both of these offenses have decent days against each other, a 27-30 type of game. Something about it feels that way to me. So that would be a good thing, and that would be, Geno Smith and Daniel Jones would probably outscore the quarterback 17-18 spots if that were the case. As far as Daniel Jones goes, Seattle's been a good matchup for quarterbacks. It's possible that we see a different Giants offense than we've seen for 10 quarters this season, this week going up against Seattle. And one of the drawbacks for Geno Smith is it could be another really good week for that running game going up against the New York Giants. Kind of my point there about not putting up huge quarterback numbers. Then for Dak Prescott, it is a tough matchup, and this offense has not hit their stride yet, it seems. And as far as Andy Dalton goes, it's an excellent matchup. I'm comfortable playing him. If I'm in a situation where I'm playing him, I have no problem with it. My third tier of quarterbacks, not going to talk about anybody here. CJ Stroud in at quarterback 21, followed by Matt Stafford, Sam Howell, Kenny Pickett, Jameis Winston, Baker Mayfield, And for my final tier of quarterbacks, we have Aiden O'Connell in at quarterback 27, followed by Josh Dobbs going up against San Francisco, whereas me, Desmond Ridder, Mac Jones, Ryan Tannehill, and Zach Wilson. As far as Aiden O'Connell goes, I think that quarterbacks making their first appearances, like midseason especially, always have a chance to have surprisingly good games. The defenses don't have anything to really game plan against if they have no film on the guy, and a lot of times these offenses might be run a little bit differently than they had been previously. So I think a lot of times these defenses get caught off guard, and or these quarterbacks end up facing really vanilla defensive game plans because they didn't really have anything to game plan against specifically. Plus, Aiden O'Connell has the single best matchup for quarterbacks so far this season, going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. So, a sneaky play, probably DFS. Two-quarterback league could be a good pickup. We don't know for sure that Aiden O'Connell will be the starter this week. Before we get to the DFS buys, let's get back to the floors and ceilings. I just want to run you through two scenarios where is the type of situations where I find this information helpful. Scenario one, your team is banged up and you're looking at the studs that you do have and they're in tough matchups. You want to take a shot for the moon and you have Jordan Love and Justin Herbert as your quarterbacks. The data would suggest, so far this season, and given the matchup and everything, that Jordan Love could have a massive night Thursday night. Sure, the projection, the expected range for Herbert is going to be better than Jordan Love. You can go back and look at the projected ranges. He's higher up on there, and I'm sure I do have a single projected number. That's probably higher for Justin Herbert as well. But Jordan Love is your ticket to an upset if you're in, a dire situation, it feels like, and you really just want to take a shot for it. Scenario two, we're going to be looking at the expected floor in this scenario. You're going up against the team that's playing Jordan Love, that's in this dire circumstance, and the projections on your fantasy website have you absolutely crushing your opponent. You just can't have any big mishaps. You're just trying to avoid disaster. Your quarterbacks are Trevor Lawrence and Geno Smith this week. Based on the matchup, based on their play up to this point in the season, by the way, Trevor Lawrence, Geno Smith, I have like 2 spots apart in my rankings in the same tier. So based on their play, based on the matchup up to this point in the season, the data would suggest that Geno Smith will give you a higher floor. You can see Geno Smith right there at 7.8 points for his floor for me, and Trevor Lawrence at 6.6 points for his floor. And then if we were to go back and we look at these thermometers for the two as well, there's Geno Smith slightly blue, and there's Trevor Lawrence a little bit less blue, but very close. Neither one of them strongly colored here as far as that the temperature gauge for these matchups go for them. So that's not going to push the needle in either direction for me to feel like, oh, but... So now let's go back to scenario one, thinking about this temperature gauge, and let's say that your team isn't so banged up that you feel like you have to take this absolute moonshot, but it's also, you're also going up against like the best team in your league, and your team, let's even say you're banged up, but your studs that you do have good matchups this week, so you're a little bit less concerned. You think you have a shot, even though it might be a little bit of a long shot. Well, now when we look at the temperature gauges for Justin Herbert here, pretty good solid red coloring there. And we look at the temperature gauge for Jordan Love down here, a little bit blue. So in that case, we don't feel like we need to take that moonshot. Let's just go with the safer play in Justin Herbert, the better expected range. Yeah, he doesn't quite have that good, as high of a ceiling, still has a good ceiling. Where are you? Right there. Just go with the obvious call. But at least you just had a little bit of data to back up that obvious call. And this is a large part Las Vegas lines and betting odds and whatnot, as well as a couple of other factors to help set this temperature gauge for if the conditions are ripe or not for that player to have a good week or maybe a poor week. And that's going to be it for this video. I know it went a little bit longer. There were things to talk about. And I do have some DFS buys for you. If we're looking for guys who are not dirt cheap, Anthony Richardson at $6,700 on DK looks to be like a really good pick if you're not trying to spend all of your salary on the quarterback position. And if we're going to go down into the bargain bin, and even more so, maybe we're going to go dumpster diving for this one at the low price, the lowest of all prices at 4,000 DK bucks, the lowest you can spend on a quarterback. You can get Aiden O'Connell in the best quarterback matchup of the week. So there we go. Thank you very much. You have a good one. Hopefully I covered everything. And once again, you can get these all up on the website, www.theFFWorks.com. Link down in the description. Peace out. Please like, comment, and subscribe.